Imagine it. The year is 1909. The entirety of Europe is undergoing issues. A lot of countries have treaties going this way and that way and backwards and around. All kinds of problems are going on, and we'll learn more about the implications of the problems going on right now in the next video. Joan of Arc is being canonized at the Vatican. Stateside, Robert E. Peary makes his way to the North Pole. The NAACP have their first meeting. The very first school in the U.S. for nursing opens up at the University of Minnesota. And finally, the only man to hold the position of both President and Chief Justice is inaugurated. One of the first things William Taft does as president is hold a special session with Congress. In it, he wants to discuss the tariff situation and probably hopes of revision, which is really meaning reduction. At least that's the hope. A few weeks later, Nellie Taft has a stroke. Mrs. Taft takes an entire year to get back to her former self. A month later, Taft has another conversation with Congress where he proposes a 2% tax coming from all corporations except for banks. He believes that this 2% tax will help with the reduction of the tariffs discussed earlier. And then while he's at it, he thinks, you know what we haven't talked about in a while? Income tax. Income tax has come up a couple of times previously and shot down both times. So why don't we do that? Why don't we do that again? Let's do it in a different way. So they come up with a gradual income tax. And therefore, the 16th Amendment is created and later passes, giving authorization to the government to collect income taxes from individuals. 3 days later, Taft gets in direct contact with Prince Chung in China. His goal is to persuade the Chinese to let the United States get involved in an investment. This investment is to build a railroad across China. The reason he's calling directly is because they let European investors in on this, but not the United States for some reason. And China reluctantly agrees. In September, Taft decides to go on a tour of the South and West of the United States. While on tour, he goes and stops in El Paso to meet with the Mexican dictator. During Taft's 2-month tour, he makes 259 speeches. But one of the attendees is quoted as saying, "I knew he was good-natured, but I never dreamed he was so dull." Although, to his credit, he gave 259 speeches in a short amount of time. Within days of Taft's return to D.C., he's hit with another kind of news. This is Richard Ballinger, who was accused of fraud. He's actually the Secretary of the Interior. And in being accused of fraud, the person making the accusation also implicates the Taft administration. Later, Congress would find both Ballinger and the administration as innocent of any wrongdoing, although Ballinger does resign. There's nothing as distracting as conflict, though. Shortly after the scandal, Taft sends 2 battleships to Nicaragua, where 500 revolutionaries and 2 Americans lost their lives due directly to the dictator situation going on in the country at the time. And within a month, the dictator resigns. Rolling into 1910, Philander Knox is sent on a goodwill mission to South America. By spring, Taft files an injunction against the railroads to keep them from inflating freight prices. He's actually quite passionate about upholding the antitrust laws. At the beginning of summer, Roosevelt returns from a year-long African safari, and Taft snubs him. So then, a month later, when Taft invites him to the White House, Teddy Roosevelt declines. And so there sparks a rift. Around that time, the ironically named Mann Act goes into effect, and it essentially says that it's illegal to bring women anywhere for immoral purposes. On the last day of August, Roosevelt gives a very impassioned speech on how he thinks that the government should be dealing with social issues, in particular, how they should be dealing with underprivileged children and issues with women. Still feeling slighted, Taft ends up bowing out of a dinner that's held in the honor of himself and Roosevelt. He may keep his thoughts to himself publicly, but privately he writes his brother and says that Roosevelt has proposed a program which is absolutely impossible to carry out except by a revision of the federal Constitution. In most of these speeches, he has utterly ignored me. His attitude towards me is one that I find difficult to understand and explain. A week before Valentine's Day, 1911, the United States and Great Britain signed a treaty to keep the seals protected in the Bering Sea. A month later, Henry Lane Wilson sends out a message to the president in regard to Mexico. He believes that Americans who are living there are in danger, so Taft sends 200,000 American troops to the border. A few weeks later, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York goes up in flames. 146 women die trying to escape, and this brings to light the lack of fire safety and exits. Out of it comes legislation for better work environments and fire safety. Just before Halloween, Taft puts the final nail in the coffin for his friendship with Roosevelt when he accuses Roosevelt of being the reason that U.S. Steel has become a monopoly, and he has filed a lawsuit against U.S. Steel because of the antitrust. On November 10th, Andrew Carnegie starts the Carnegie Foundation with an original endowment of $125 million. That's in 1911. Today, that would be $4 billion of his personal funds. At the start of 1912, both New Mexico and Arizona become states. At the onset of spring, Nellie Taft plants a gift from Japan, which are these cherry blossoms. On April 14th, Taft's aide, Archie Butt, loses his life in the sinking of the Titanic. Around this time, Julia Lathrop becomes the highest-ranking female in the U.S. government when she's put in charge of the Children's Bureau, which was recently opened to monitor the welfare of children. In June, Congress passes the 8-hour workday for federal employees. Due to ongoing issues within the Republican Party, the Progressive Republicans split from the Conservative Republicans and created their own Progressive Party, head up by Teddy Roosevelt, and they capitalized off of the success of the administration under Roosevelt by putting the square deal all around. The Bull Moose Party effectively guaranteed a Democrat win in the fall. So when the results came in November, you had overwhelmingly the Electoral College was won by the Democrat, but Teddy Roosevelt got 88 electoral votes, and the actual sitting president Taft only got 8. Before the election, though, John Sherman, the vice president, passes away. Before leaving office, Taft becomes the second president to veto a bill requiring all people who immigrate to the United States be able to read. He also vetoes a bill that makes it illegal for alcohol to pass through dry states, but Congress passes it anyway. Tune in next time for the next wartime president.